All right. Hello, ambassadors. Thank you all for joining me today and agreeing to come and speak with me in a recorded interview. I really appreciate it. I feel like, we've interacted so much in the first half of the year as it came to be clear that you were our 2023 Ambassador Award winners. So I feel like I know you already, but it's nice to be able to, meet in person over Zoom. So thank you again for joining me. Before I'm going to go into a little bit of an explainer about what the Ambassador Awards is for anyone watching who doesn't know. But before I do, I thought it would be helpful to go around and I'll call on each of you in alphabetical order. And if you could just state your name and affiliation for us, that would be wonderful. Starting with Xochitl.
Hello, I'm Dr. Xochitl Clare. I'm a postdoctoral researcher at the University of Washington School of Aquatic and Fisheries Studies.
Thank you, Xochitl. And Chelsea?
Hi, everyone. I'm Dr. Chelsea Cross, and I am a course leader at the National Conservation Training Center in West Virginia.
Liyutan?
I'm Dr. Xochitl Luna. I'm a research associate here in Penn State University and working with conservation genetics.
Thank you. Nidia?
Hi, I'm Nidia. I am postdoc here in UNAM in Institute of Ecología. I am working with Antipitos Antonio, interesting species.
Thank you, Nidia. And Kelsey?
Hi, thanks, Meredith. I'm Dr. Kelsey Moore. I am a postdoctoral fellow at Johns Hopkins University in the Department of Earth and Planetary Sciences.
Thank you all so much for joining. Congratulations again to all of you. To provide some background for some people who watching may not be familiar, the Ambassador Awards is in its sixth year at BioOne, and it was designed to recognize early career authors who make scientific research more broadly accessible. So whether that's to funders or scientists in other fields of research or to the general public. So in order to win this award, you must submit a piece which creatively and clearly and effectively communicates your work to the average person. And I have to say, hats off to all of you. I truly loved reading and watching your pieces, and I learned something new every time. And I am not a PhD. So you clearly accomplished what you set out to do. Just really enjoyed everything that you submitted. And my background is in writing and literature. And so I noticed the techniques that you used, like, metaphor to create an image of a scientific concept that somebody might not understand, or using second person to speak directly to the reader and pose questions of the reader. Nidia, you went so far as to explain what a taxonomist does, which seems so simple, but is so important. And, Xochitl, I felt like I could understand what your video was about with the sound off, because it was so powerful and moving. And this goes for all of you. I could go on forever about all of your pieces. So congrats again. And this brings me to my first question. Why do you think it is important to be able to summarize scientific research for the average person? And how have your skills in science communication been beneficial to your research and careers?
I think for me, it's kind of twofold. On the one side, I think the reason that we all study what we study is because we are passionate about it and we're excited about it and we think that it's interesting. And so science is really only fun if you get to share that with other people, other scientists. And I find myself, at least, that both communicating with the general public and communicating with scientists who are outside of my field of expertise are sometimes very similar. And so having the skills to be able to communicate what makes my work interesting and impactful, it brings me more joy in the work that I do. So I think that side of it's important. And then I also think that it's important in a just sort of realistic sense to be able to communicate about real world issues like climate change, and help the public understand why those topics are important.
I'll dive in here. I couldn't agree more, Kelsey. That was a wonderful response. And I myself did come into science as a non-scientist. So for most of my life, as I outlined in my video, I did theater arts. And so it were pieces like the ones that we created that used metaphor, that employed on all these different types of communication tools that made it possible for me to bridge into a totally different discipline. And I think that's what science communication does. It invites people from many walks of life to participate. And as we move into trying to think about inclusivity a bit more, I know that doing science communication has gifted me a lot of open-mindedness about the different ways in which people engage with the work that we do. It might not always sound like how we sound, but they could still be very interested and very concerned about these issues.
Absolutely. Inclusivity is so important. I agree. And that's the way to bring people in and make science less elitist. I thought it would be nice to go around and say, what inspired you? And anyone can answer if you don't feel like responding, but what inspired you to pursue your field of study? What was your gateway species? Like what got you hooked into what you're studying?
Yeah, I started to think about species and population that have been endangered. So I started when I would say that my connection with this field came way before I entered in academia or university. Because when I was growing up, during my summertime, I was going to that place in the northern of Brazil that it's a small forest. And by this time, we didn't know that that species that I would work with that later, the Arab mannequin, was there. That species was discovered in the end of the late 90s. So and so years later, I discovered that species was there. Then that species was so endangered that brought my attention. Okay, I should do something about it. So I start to ask my supervisor, so if I could be more involved with the conservation project behind, to cover more and understand more the impact of habitat fragmentation and population growth on this biodiversity that's so endangered. So that was my species, the mannequin, the Arab mannequin, that gave me the chance to dive in the world of science, the world of communication to people, and bridging these two that sometimes seems so apart, but actually is not.
That way specific because for my regular studies, I made checklist, floristic checklist of zone of Oaxaca in Mexico. And this kind of studies are very important because we don't know what are in our own areas of study, and we find very new species and very, very circumscription taxonomic problems. And that was my first aside in the taxonomy and all the problems around the circumscription of the species, the ignorance of the botany in Mexico, in many parts of the world. And many of these species are lack of knowledge to further studies or to conservation, for instance.
So what inspired me into getting into herpetology? So I grew up in a very urban area, and I thought, nature was a city park. And so I never intended to be a wildlife biologist. And then I went out on an ecology field trip and got my first spotted salamander. So that was my gateway species. And they were breeding in essentially, there's a sewer line and there's a impression where the water was, filling up. And it got me interested in understanding how humans have affected amphibian reproduction. So that's what got me started.
So mine, I actually credit one of my second grade teachers with inspiring me to study what I study. When I was in second grade, I remember very distinctly there was this lesson that we did where the teachers took this very long piece of just black felt and rolled it out down the hallway. And at the very end of it, there was this one little red strip at the end. And they told us that if you imagine that that entire piece of felt is the entire time that the Earth has existed, that little red strip at the end is how long in Earth history humans have been around. And there are all of these billions of years before we existed. And that totally blew my mind. And so from that moment on, all I wanted to do was study what came before us, what filled up all of that extra time, and when did life start, and how did we get to where we are? So definitely that was the starting point for me.
For me, it's snails. I've always loved things that are funky contradictions, and snails are exactly that, because in the marine world, they are decorated. They are beautiful, vibrant colored animals. They are predators. Snails, of all things that move so slow, can also be predators as well as prey. And as we know now, can even be bioindicators of ecosystem level stress. And so I think as I kind of grew to appreciate all the different relationships in our marine ecosystems, I was just fascinated with my first undergraduate research project on snails. And I think that really expanded my mind, because most people, when they think about the sea, they're thinking about the large megafauna, the whales and things, which are also so very important. But it brought me that extra level of awareness of the interconnectivity of things, starting from something as small as a snail. So that was my gateway species.
It's so cool. I loved all of your answers. Do you have FOMO about any species that you're not studying? So if you could study anything other than your research focus, and also a favorite species that you wish you could study.
I believe that I'm studying a really good species, but I think I would like to dive in more, not just one single species, but in the interaction of like whole community. Because most of the time we're looking just like one population or group, but actually we are seeing a decayment of an entire ecosystem. So maybe I would like to move from one single subject to maybe more than one, to see all the dimensions and connection between this ecosystem, and how can using science, and use not just science but a popular acknowledgement to build up conservation actions that could be more effective. Yeah, I would say moving from one species to an ecosystem. It doesn't matter; it could be like a regional ecosystem or a local ecosystem, but
that was, I think, kind of related to my interest as well, because I do study fisheries, right? So we know that there's a lot of human interaction and human behavior that influences how our marine fish ecosystems respond to multiple stressors. And so that's something that I think I know that I want to do, is kind of look more into the human side of things. I think if we were talking about FOMO, I talked about the bottom of the ecosystem, but I've always been interested in that interconnectivity too. So if there was an opportunity in the future, I think I'd be interested in seeing maybe top down. So like megafauna and how that kind of goes the other way, just to kind of round out that perspective. And humans are a part of that too. So I think definitely, instead of bottom up, maybe top down, and all that entails.
So there's a lot of things I wish I could study. But I would say I'm really interested in parasites. And there's a lot of really cool invasive parasites that are starting to spread, especially in the US. And so any kind of gross parasite interaction you can think of, I'm pretty interested in studying, but I never had a parasitology class, so that never really got into my my toolkit.
Yeah, that's not easy question, because biology can you could close your eyes and put your finger in any species, and it will be super interesting. But I love the interactions, but I have to say that diatoms are my favorite algae, and maybe if I would know a botany, maybe I could be studying that. Yeah.
Yeah, I agree. I also love diatoms. I think they're wonderful. Yeah, I was actually going to say other kinds of phototrophic organisms. So the microbe that I tend to spend the most time studying is cyanobacteria, which are sort of the original photosynthetic organism on Earth. And I've always been curious about some of the other organisms like diatoms and other algae and plants as well. The organisms that are kind of the foundation of everything that makes everything in the world work.
On a more serious note, one common theme, and Kelsey touched on this already at one point, is, in most of your submissions, whether it's, tangentially to, with Kelsey talking about the importance of microbes on our planet, or more overtly in Chelsea and Layton's and Xochitl's pieces about global change and the effect on it in endangered species, ocean warming, is the reality of human-caused climate change. So I realize, this is a big topic. I mean, we can't get everything into this call, but I would love to talk a little bit about, the biggest threats that you see generally in your research, how it impacts your work, and what areas of research are most needed now.
Well, specifically talking about climate change, I think the pace now is so fast that evolution, they take like really long time. We're talking like not just in ecological time, but in geological time scale. So for one species to adapt a new environment, a new situation, it takes time, right? And it's going to depend on a lot of things. Mostly the biology of the species. For the already endangered species, climate change, well, it's a huge wave. The species cannot stand against it just because they don't have enough, I would say, material to use to survive against this changing. When I say material, I would go to the molecular level, the way that they don't have enough genetic diversity or even other ecological adaptability to surpass any fast change. So I think it's a running that endangered species, they don't have any chance.
Just kind of piggybacking on what Layton said, climate change, there's just so many challenges. And for like my study species that I was nominated for, was crawfish frog, and they live in more arid open canopy grassland habitats and river valleys. And so there's a lot of challenges with precipitation and agriculture, because most of the habitats they're found in are agricultural habitats now. And so I've been doing a lot of thinking about how the human wildlife interactions and communication with, private landowners and agricultural practitioners could potentially help offset some of the effects of climate change, and kind of coming at from a different angle, as in the more human wildlife conflict resolution.
I think the two things that come to mind are multi-stressor kind of research, because we already know that there are human impacts like pollution, like we just talked about, the agriculture situation of runoff, whatever farmers put in, go into the sea or go into the nearby waterways, overfishing, and then development, all of these things like degrading habitat with the climate change stressor. So you have these two things working now to add another layer of complexity and impact that's different by region. So it's more important now than ever, I think, to think about multiple stressors at the same time, and then being region specific to how that's going to work. And then also we talked about offsets, and regionally, what are people motivated to change and what are they not? And how do we work within that? So those are those questions that I think within all fields of, biology, ecology, that we're all thinking about.
Yeah. And Leighton, what you mentioned also about, the species not being able to adapt quickly enough for how fast it's moving is such a disturbing concept. And, what you mentioned, Xochitl, about what's important to people. Like when you mention overfishing, it's like, what is the solution to that? And can there be something that can happen sooner rather than later? And at this point, climate change is well beyond an emergency. And so it's so important to bring attention to these issues. And so I so appreciate that all of you did that in your pieces. Kelsey?
Yeah, I think I have sort of two pieces to my answer. One is, as somebody who studies Earth history and life history, we can look back at the rock record and see periods during which massive changes occurred in our climate and kind of the environment, and how those correlate to really strong impacts on ecosystems and biospheres, and how negatively impacted organisms throughout Earth history have been. And I think one of the biggest things right now to think about, in addition to all of the different endangered species that we're concerned about on the Earth, is also the impact that climate change has on people, and the kind of differential impact that it has on different populations. And I think that that's really important when we consider the really kind of in this moment impacts of things like changes in weather patterns and more intensified storms and things, and how that negatively impacts different populations, even within our own country. So I think that's a really important piece to keep in mind in all climate-related research. And then for my kind of sphere of scientists and folks that I spend day-to-day conversations with, a lot of what we think about is how we can translate some of our work to efforts related to things like carbon capture and sequestration, and how we can try to use some of the techniques and tools in our research to help to contribute to that push toward trying to remove some of the carbon dioxide and some of the negative impacts that have started kind of taking away in our atmosphere.
From the biologist's perspective, it's not too easy to say that people need to understand that all the environment we are is important to make the interactions work well. But I don't know. For me, I was in the field 3 weeks ago, and the people suffer because they have no water, and it's a big problem. And when I ask about Antiphytum hintoniorum, that is not that important for them, although this species is endemic from this area. They need water, and this is difficult to share that it's important to the conservation, but the people had necessities first of all. It's a difficult thread, I think. Yeah.
Absolutely. So thank you all so much for addressing that issue, and again for in your pieces for bringing attention to these issues in a way that everyone can understand. Not just PhDs and scientists that are studying these fields of research. So going back to scientific communication, where do you see the future of scholarly communication? How might it be different in 10 years or 50 years? And what are some skills that tomorrow's researchers will need that today's may not have?
One big thing that I think we all probably have seen and experienced is this huge shift in scientific communication and the ability to communicate with the public that comes along with social media and blogs and Twitter and all of these things. So I actually kind of think that this generation and future generations of scientists are going to be even better at science communication, because I think they practice it kind of in daily life, which I think is a really good and important thing. I think every scientist could be better at science communication, and it's always a good thing to practice.
Following this thread, I think it's also challenging because right now we are facing this, people are denying science and they use like all kinds of excuses, even like I would say fake science to support their argument. So I think having the ability to understand a situation and be able to communicate in the way that is honest and showing like real numbers, and again try to convey this information in a more broad way so can people from everywhere, for any language, they can understand. I would say for me, it's a big change because my mother language is Portuguese. So moving here and try to communicate in different language, it requires a different mindset. And this is the same thing when you're talking to people in social media, for example. At each group has a different way to speak, right? So we have to, as a scientist, it's a multitasking stuff, right? You have to produce the science, and then it has to be good in communication. In that moment, you have to know your public. So every time you're communicating for a different group, you have to understand them first, understand the social situation, the political situation. And then after that, you can speak up in the way they can catch your information and not twist your information in the way they can use for dismiss science, but the way they cannot dismiss your words in any way. So I think it's very challenging now to have the skills, but I think we're trying to do our best to everyday learning about how can we communicate science or any communication in different parts, different spheres, I would say.
Yeah, and thank you for bringing excellent points, and thank you for bringing up a topic that's really an important topic right now in the publishing industry as well. Is what role do we play in filtering out fake science and being able to, research integrity is just a very important issue right now. And thank you for bringing that up.
We have, as science communicators, we're kind of in this new realm of using social media, and there's so many different types of social media, and having to use that effectively, but also combat the disinformation campaigns that can be rampant. And so I think that's our current challenge. And I think in the future, future communicators, they're going to hopefully learn from our mistakes and learn from tools that we start working with. I'm sure artificial intelligence is going to be important in the future. And so I think they'll, be able to use these tools to more effectively get our messages out in science communication and, reach a broader audience.
Yeah. And I've been interested in what role AI might play in making it possible, as Leighton said, that challenges with language barriers and things like that, and what role it might play in helping people get published. I know it's a tricky thing too because of disinformation, but anyway, it's an interesting topic to me.
Yes, all really great points. I think about a formalized reward system for soft skills. So as much as we are talking about science being the communicators to the public, internally within our disciplines, we tend to not formalize, the value of being a good leader, a good educator, someone who is bringing people together and making sure people's voices are heard. That's a very new concept. Whereas other disciplines, you can get a promotion in business management if you are good at rallying your people to do their job. And so in our discipline, as we're trying to expand and we're trying to actually engage people, these are the types of skills that we want to recruit for, we want to reward for, and continuously do. And so this is why this BioOne program is phenomenal in celebrating people like ourselves that are trying to do these things. And so I think more formalization of these types of things will then only make us stronger and able to really be inclusive. And then, it will be so much easier once we've learned how to communicate with each other to bring on journalists and teach them how to work with us. So recruiting people who have those soft skills, those abilities to communicate, the emotional intelligence training that's needing to do that, so that we can really make the impact that we want to make.
Yeah, absolutely. That makes perfect sense to me. Thank you, Xochitl. Nidia?
I think that
science could be seen as something far away from the people, but because we have a language, a technical language, and the people does not know about terms, scientific terms. For example, mathematics is difficult because we don't understand the symbols. But I think that maybe we're training in formal articles and papers, but we will try to do an effort to every time with a single cartoon or a little sentence, communicate our discoveries or I don't know, the name of a species, for example, or with a few description or characteristics in social media. A little effort is not more, maybe. Yeah.
Absolutely. Thinking outside the box. And like we talked about, metaphor, images, ways to connect people with these concepts when they're not, like you said, trained in the language that you are trained in, the scientific language. How would you encourage the next generation of researchers? So what would you tell them, or what would you tell yourself 10 years ago?
Yeah, I think so. I went to Smith College for undergrad, and I had some really phenomenal professors who really instilled this idea of a growth mindset in me, which is this idea that knowledge and intelligence are not intrinsic qualities. They're things that can be built and gained. And so I think what I hope to kind of help future generations of students understand is that they don't enter a classroom with the expectation that they have all the knowledge that they need already. And this idea that, oh, I can't do science or I can't do math because I'm not good at it. And instead, I want to shift my future students and mentees into thinking that, no, if I'm passionate about something and I'm curious and I'm excited, then I have the ability to pursue that curiosity. So that's how I hope to kind of further future generations. And also just the reality that is academia and science are filled with failure, and failure is okay. And I think that everybody needs to get better at being okay with failure, because along with failure comes success as well.
Right. And failure is part of the process, right?
Yeah.
When we're trying to uncover new ideas. Thank you.
I would say that things that I always mention with the student that I'm working with, or even the one that I'm mentoring now, is that go away from your comfort zone. Talk with people. When you're talking to people, first you can have to listen to them. Think about what they're talking, and then you can construct your ideas, and then you speak up, right? Because that way you can build more than just thinking about science, how you construct science, because it's just the science process is part of the method, right? But talking to people is more like a personal touch. So if I could be back in time and speak to myself, I would say, be outside of your comfort zone and try to learn from people that are not from academia as well, right? Because sometimes we put ourselves in this position that we retain or detain the knowledge. But I think we can learn a lot. Well, I come from the Amazon, so I spend lots of time with people from different communities, and even in the original people from my country, the indigenous people, and they know a lot of things that we don't have any idea, like how useful and how amazing is that knowledge. And if you learn about this, we can find a way to speak to them in the same language. Those things is important for their community and for our society.
Absolutely. What a great answer. So I imagine that's a big part of it, right? Is not getting too attached to your, ivory tower or whatever, not getting too, right. And thinking and appreciating knowledge from other places. What a great response. Thanks.
I want to speak on the fact that when you're on your journey, you might have a sense of where you're going to go. but you have no idea what else you might do along the way. For me, that was being an aspiring marine biologist, never having learned how to swim until being an adult in college. And so that was, 10 years ago now, that's when I started that journey. That's when I started to learn how to swim. That's when I started to even become a part of the sea, which, as cliche as that sounds, was really, really hard. But I was encouraged along the way to speak on the journey along the way. And that was very hard. We like to talk about things like we talked about with perfection, when it's over, when it's done, when it's nice and ready to share. And I had no idea that in sharing my journey with other people, my struggles, my challenges, that I'd also build community and inspire other people who are, embarking on the same journey. So I'd say be open to surprises and be open to just being open about what you're going through where you are, because you're not alone, and who knows what you'll build in that process.
So I'm going to piggyback a little bit off of Xochitl's response, in that building a community is, probably one of the largest factors in success, especially in science and academia. And being, I'm an introvert, so it's very hard for me to, break out of my shell and interact with others. And so being willing to, go introduce yourself to, more prominent researchers in your field, and introducing yourself, because during my undergrad, I met a PhD student that PhD student eventually became my PhD advisor. And so you don't know what connections you're going to make that are, going to be important in your future career endeavors. So yeah, building a really good support network is great.
That's great advice. And going back to confidence, right? And putting yourself out there, making new connections, definitely.
I think that passion for the study and nature of, I don't know, academia degrees and other things could be very hard, and the feeling of do bad things is very hard for a student of science. But I think that keeping in mind that science is a real and fun activity is, I think, is the best way to remember that the nature and the world and the environment and the interactions are marvelous, and to keep in studying. Yeah, I don't know.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense to me. Not taking it too seriously, remembering to have fun and to just take it all in and enjoy the marvel of studying science. That's beautiful. Thank you. I cannot tell you enough how proud we are of this class of ambassadors, how well-deserved your wins are, and how proud we are that you are out there representing the BioOne community. I was just blown away by all of you. I continue to be blown away by all of you, especially all of your responses in this interview. So thank you. And we will be following your work, and we can't wait to see the ways in which you all change the world.